All for coming and staying to the second of our forums tonight. We are very glad you've joined. The forum for this evening's session, the second hour, will be exactly the same as the format of this last hour. My name is Orna Samueli. I helped put these sessions together because I think an informed community is very critical. Understanding both sides of an issue is important. And so this format is designed to help you understand the perspectives of the two candidates running against each other for City Council. I'd like to thank our candidates for taking the time to meet with us tonight. We appreciate the opportunity to understand the issues that impact our lives and the lives of all our neighbors on Mercer Island. Please welcome the two candidates that will talk with you tonight, Debbie Bertlin and Jake Jacobson.
No. Yes, thank you.
I'd also like to introduce Kate Rosenbaum. She will be moderating our session tonight. Kate is no relation to Dave Rosenbaum, the candidate. And also Tina and Dave Vandenbosch, who are our timekeepers here tonight. Before I turn it over to Kate, I just want to spend a moment with a few ground rules and key points. First, the evening is intended to be informative for the audience and fair for the candidates. The candidates were all shared the rules before agreeing to come tonight, so in advance, the agenda, the format, the rules have all been agreed to and distributed. Based on a coin toss, Jake Jacobson will start with the statements once Kate turns it over. Second point, please hold your applause until the end. And we appreciate that. It will help expedite the evening. You'll hear more from the candidates, and then we can have a rousing round of applause at the very end. Lastly, there are some filming the event. Ira is filming the event, and that will be posted on Nextdoor. We've agreed to permit this. If you're uncomfortable being on film or on camera, we ask that you either step to the back or leave the venue. Finally, please grant us a little courtesy and grace because sometimes the microphones don't work or there's other distractions. So we're doing this on your behalf, but sometimes a few things might go wrong. So please, we appreciate your grace. I'll turn it over to Kate.
Thanks, Orna. I'm Kate Rosenbaum, and I am a resident of Mercer Island. I want to just go over the rules and how the format's going to be. We're going to start with opening statements of 3 minutes from each candidate, and then they will have a 1-minute response from each candidate, and then we'll open the floor up to you because we want to hear your questions. So we're going to ask that you form a line over here, and I will pass you the mic, and you can ask your question. I ask that you state your name briefly, give us a little context. Please be brief. And then ask your question, and then we'll let each candidate have 1.5 minutes to answer the question, and I'll alternate who goes first. And when we're done with the question session, we will then let each candidate have a closing statement. If you have a cell phone, please turn it off. If you are a candidate who has a cell phone, and turn off the timer buzzing sounds too. That would be helpful. And with no further ado, we'll start. Jake, you get to go first. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Jake Jacobson. I've lived in Mercer Island for 30 years, like I bet a whole lot of you. I moved here, thank you. I moved here for the schools. What I didn't realize when I did that was that there was more to, as they say on that TV ad. And that's the quality of life. The ability to not only have my young children go to the schools, but also to have the parks, to have the businesses, to have the neighbors and the friends that I've made is just incalculable, and I'm very, very grateful for it. I practiced construction and government contracts law for 20 years, and for the past 25 years, I've been a senior executive in a construction company. I'm responsible for the business side of the operations and for our contract performance. I've decided that my reason for running for City Council is because I believe that our quality of life here needs to be sustained and enhanced. And I think what's happened over the past 8 years, we've moved somewhat backward in that. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and let you see if this informs you about who I am and what I think about this community. You may recall about 7 years ago that our school board put up a bond to to demolish the 3 elementary schools and build new ones because they were overcrowded. More kids were going to be in portables than were going to be in classrooms. I campaigned against that, and I campaigned very hard because I thought it wasn't going to deliver any solution in a timely fashion, and the costs significantly outweighed the benefits. So, election was over, and Ralph Jorgensen, Hillary Benson, and some other people came and said, "What do you got against education, Jake?" And I said, "Well, nothing. My dad spent his life in it. My mom was a high school teacher. My sister's a college professor, and I was the only one who was behind the door on that." And they said, "Well, we have a vision, and we want your help and support, and you to get other people's help and support to put together a plan that the school board, we can sell to the school board, and we'll sell to this community." And that's what happened. And Northwood Elementary School is a result of that. And the middle school and the high school are now more or less right-sized because of that. I've been a long-time supporter of Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. I personally made sure that an additional 16 hours of each week of volunteer service is devoted to the thrift shop. And that will continue presumably into the future. I support the Market Foundation. So in this campaign, I've beaten on doors. I don't think I can beat Patrick Alcorn's record, but he's younger and more fit than I am by a long shot, so I can see that one. But the one thing I've heard is that our citizens are frustrated. They don't believe that they've been heard, and they don't believe that the city council or my opponent really care about what they have to say.
Jake, I'm going to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Debbie Bertlin, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I appreciate the time that you've taken on a dark and rainy evening to be here. I, too, am essentially a 30-plus year resident or lifelong resident. I am a graduate of West Mercer Elementary and beyond that. When I left Mercer Island High School, I went to Stanford University and have my undergraduate and graduate degrees, as well as a graduate degree from the University of Sussex. I've been truly fortunate to have lived and worked around the world, including Europe, Africa, and Asia. So I'm running for re-election because I actually believe that there's more good work to be done through positivity, inclusiveness, and a constructive approach. I came into office with a strong resume of civic work as well as in the private sector. As a board member of MIPA, I led the effort to renovate Luther Burbank Park as an accessible playground, led our First Hill neighborhood in petitioning for a walkway on 72nd Avenue, and I chaired the Open Space Conservancy Trust. I fought consistently for gender equity and diversifying voices at the table, and will continue to do so. I'm proud of the many Islander endorsements, including the majority of the current and incoming school board members, Jody, Chris, and John Conrad of YFS Foundation, local business community members such as Matt and Michelle Galvin, Emmett Molith, and Terry Mormon. And in today's world, there's a lot going on. We've got more people, we've got more development, pretty much more everything. Yet in this, I see the potential to keep what is good and make Mercer Island even stronger, embracing the smarts and innovation in the community, including the people in this room. I believe in managing our future and fitting its shape to our terrific traditions of safety, open spaces, compassion, and pragmatic finances. And to be a little bit more specific about that, if I could page to change. I'd like to focus on, in the coming years, keeping our kids and families safe through traditional police, fire, and importantly, the preventative services of YFS, taking real steps on behalf of our planet, our island, its parks and open spaces for future generations. I got to spend a lovely 2.5 hours at Homestead Field planting over 375 shrubs, bushes, and trees. Not alone, there were a lot of great volunteers there as well. We need to give Micah the opportunity to succeed at the former Tully's site and create new mobility options with Islander commuting, safe transit, and intersections that do work for those cars, bikes, peds, and even buses too. Last week, your council did send a letter pushing back on Sound Transit and Metro, establishing the principles or reestablishing those of the Sound Transit Settlement Agreement. So let's go ahead and double down on our strong relationship with the school board. We have the same voting population that addresses the district as does the council. And let's provide our kids with those great academics and a positive place to explore and grow. My Island Books candidate hour last night was terrific. It was actually moderated by a high school senior, and we focused on questions. Those students made it clear that they want more engagement and a better environment, and I mean environment generally, and also as well as in terms of the planet. So as always, I remain committed to factual and constructive conversation. There's more good work to be done, and I look forward to your questions tonight.
Thanks, Debbie. Jake, you've got 1 minute.
Thank you. Our city's broken. 6 city managers in 6 years. The city manager, the city attorney, the finance director, the IT director, and the parks director have all resigned in the last 6 months. And we don't have replacements for them. We have a fight with Sound Transit, which you might surprise you to know, our acting interim city manager and DSG director are falling all over themselves to issue permits to Sound Transit without consulting the attorneys we've hired to represent us on the settlement agreement negotiated, but abandoned basically until recently by my opponent. We have work to do.
I think it's super important to understand the context in which you're working. There's a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunity that is in front of the council and the community right now. When we originally started with Sound Transit, there was a call to hold the permits then. Withholding permits is actually an administrative activity, and your city could be sued and held for damages. So I think it's important that we look at the context, that we take the legal advice we have. The turnover that we have in the city right now is 17%, which is more than twice what it's been historically. And that's because, I think as we all know, that there's an issue with some of the environment in terms of the community expectations as well as the feedback that has gone to our staff. The other part of it is when Prop 1 didn't pass, we couldn't refill some of those positions because we don't have the budget and we're facing additional deficits in the years to come. And I believe deficits that will exceed anything that efficiencies will bring. So again, I believe that there is opportunity before us. When we look at the future and we look at the growth around us, when we look at the transit, et cetera, we can make Mercer Island better in that context. We need not fear it.
Thank you. We're going to open the floor now for questions. If you have a question you'd like to ask of the candidates, I ask you to form a line right here to my right. We have our first question.
Hello, I'm Marguerite Smith, and I'm going to put forward a question to you and then put to the other candidates. And I am a long-term resident and park user, and I have a dog. So my question is focused on that. What are your respective positions with regard to parks, and also with regard to dogs and parks?
Jake, you get to go first for that one. You have a minute and a half.
I went first last night, that's fair.
Yeah, you get to go first.
Well, I like dogs. I have 2 of them, and I pick up after them, so the poop police in Kirkland have nothing to do on me. We have an incredible gift of parks, trails, and beaches in Mercer Island. I use them. I've used them since I've been here and wore out some young kids that I couldn't otherwise wear out using them. I believe that we should preserve and protect our parks. I believe we should put them in a trust and keep people from tampering with them for some other purpose. And I'm foursquare about that. I'm not sure, I understand that my opponent didn't want to respond to the parks survey. But excuse me, the parks are something that we do have to preserve and that we can't bring back if they ever go. So putting them in a trust like Pioneer Park is the answer, and move on.
So I did respond to the park survey. We'll have to check and find out what happened there. So as I mentioned, my pre-council career actually was largely in the parks. I got involved when I was on the Mercer Island Preschool Association board, and I focused on parks. And our 4-year-old daughter fell off some playground equipment and broke her arm, and that's when I realized we had no accessible playground on Mercer Island. Very proud to have continued that work into the city council. Equally, I was chair of the Open Space Conservancy Trust. Mercer Island, we have established a new parks board at this point, and that parks board is there now to provide a consistent voice and representation from around the island about the best uses and future of those parks. So I think that's a new asset that we'll be able to use, and voices and outreach into the community that will be super helpful. I also believe that arts and parks are not incompatible, and I think that that's an important area for us to look at continuing to improve. Regarding dogs, I too have 2 4-month-old puppies, but they're about 50 pounds each, which is why I have a whole bunch of scars on my arms and everything else right now. So I believe that it's a great combination that we have of off-leash park areas for our dogs, but equally we do need to also respect that there's a great deal of park where those dogs do need to be leashed for the well-being of the community, and sometimes in many cases for the well-being of other dogs. I would say there's been several instances where unfortunately people have been hurt either crossing streets or in parks based on people not having their dogs leashed. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll do the best I can. Thank you. This has to be briefer. As I mentioned, there are 2 things that can devastate this community. I want to ask you the same question. One is fire, one is earthquake. In 2017, a major fire in Columbia Gorge was set by a 15-year-old using fireworks. We had the smoke here in Seattle. I bought what was considered safe and sane fireworks that burned, sparklers that burned at 2,000 degrees. In my opinion, these are not safe and sane. Would you consider a ban on fireworks here? Thank you.
I have advocated for far greater restrictions, if not a ban, on not only the discharge of fireworks, but also the sale of fireworks. And that started when I first came on council, and my cohort in that was Councilmember Mike Grady. I believe that they are not safe, that we are one of the only communities that allows that. But I understand also that it's a fundraising tradition with organizations such as Kiwanis and Rotary. I met with them and offered to establish other fundraising activities. So what's happened since then, and I would also mention that my daughter was hit by a quote-unquote safe and sane firework and had 2nd-degree burns on her back, thank goodness, on her neck. Thank goodness that she turned her head in time. So I think that what we need to be looking at is both, again, regulating the sale and regulating the discharge. I have no problem with that, which it comes with summer celebration or city. There was a private fireworks display that was on September 20th, and that was all done, permitting, etc. So I would agree, and I would continue to support. The council did push that annual permitting decision for the fireworks sale to the fire chief, so it no longer comes before the community every year. The other part that I would mention is that there was a survey, or a question on the community survey several years ago, and within a margin of error, the community was actually split roughly 50-50 on whether or not we should continue the sale and or discharge. So clearly, there's some different opinions, but I do believe that it's time for us to put an end to that in the private realm now.
There are 2 aspects to your question there you are, sorry. 2 aspects of it. One's risk management. I know that we on Mercer Island, our fire department, is more robustly manned at the time of fire, 4th of July and other kinds of occasions like that. So from the standpoint of risk management, I think what we're doing is prudent. I don't think that we're in danger of burning the island down. That isn't to say that we oughtn't to be careful, and that anybody who handles fireworks should understand and do it with safety. The experience of other communities is somewhat instructive also with regard to this. If you don't sell legal fireworks, guess where people go? And from everything that I have understood, many of these other communities have lots and lots of people firing off fireworks regardless of what the laws happen to be. And so I think we have to think very carefully about the unintended consequences of passing something that we can't enforce and that is in all likelihood may not help people. We're all responsible for the safety of those our families and those we mentor, and that's an all-encompassing responsibility.
Thank you.
I have a question for Debbie Bertlin. I'm looking for strong leadership on the council and council members who are in touch and understand the voters of Mercer Island. You favored Proposition 1 of the levy that failed, which suggests to me that you weren't in touch with the voters of Mercer Island. Second, you recently violated an ethics violation because you used city resources for your campaign. And you also have not expressed where you stand on changes to the intercept settlement agreement that you signed. And I guess I view these as failures of leadership. And my question is, do you take responsibility for these actions? And can most Mercer Island voters use these mistakes in evaluating your leadership?
I know your question was directed at Debbie, but Debbie is not going to answer that first. Jake, you get to answer that first.
First of all, I support the settlement agreement that you made, and we should enforce it. Secondly, about 42 years ago, I took an oath as a lawyer in the state of Washington to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Washington and all of the laws of those things, and signed on for some very detailed ethical rules, and I've observed them. And I will observe not only the letter and the spirit of every ethical rule that there is that we deal with. We have a tough go on the sound transit business, and if we don't stand on our rights, we're going to be run over. That's a sad reality of life. What's happened here is, and how this has progressed is very clear. We have an agreement with Sound Transit. Then they give us a bunch of goalpost moving moves. What do? We study them, we negotiate them, we spend $600,000 studying them. That's not sound management of our city and acting in the interests of our citizens. Thank you.
Thanks for those actually sort of three questions. The first one is, I have taken responsibility for the ethics violation, and I've done so. It was quoted in the Mercer Reporter as well as on my Facebook page. Essentially what happened is I asked city staff to send in writing our next door policy to me, and I asked from my city email account. I did that because this issue was raised to me in a meeting as the mayor. I accept that I used it in the context of answering a questionnaire, but I've also used it numerous times as your city council member. I also appreciate the full council recognizing that there was essentially no harm done, no advantage gained, etc. So the second one, Prop 1, it was too much too fast, and I think I've also addressed that in numerous questionnaires. We put it together too quickly. We voted on it in July, and it was a 5-2 vote. Yet it was a complex set of issues, and we didn't get enough information out there. I don't think that that means that it isn't needed or that there isn't a serious financial issue, but I certainly have learned lessons and would be happy to share those with you, more in private. The third part is, I actually was one of the people who negotiated that Sound Transit settlement agreement, and I've been very consistent that I support none of those options. None of those options, because none of them have complied with the Sound Transit settlement agreement. Stated that this spring, stated it again at a voter forum in July. Last week, we sent a letter to Sound Transit and Metro stating exactly the same thing. We need those buses, that if they're going to be on Mercer Island or dropping off on the south side, and that there's limits to the layovers.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask these questions. My name is Meg Lippert. I'm the co-chair of Concerned Citizens for Mercer Island Park. And my question is to you, Mayor Bertlin, that I was surprised and delighted to hear that you were involved with the Open Space Conservancy and that you got to protect our parks. But it's a question of trust, because when the MOU was signed to donate practically an acre of public parkland for an art center, and by the way, I'm an artist, I teach the arts. I support the idea of an art center, but not in our parks. I just want to know why the council required a massive effort of the citizens to keep the parkland for public use by everybody.
So let's keep in mind that when we looked at putting, or allowing rather, Mike and the fundraise to put an arts facility at Mercerdale, it was where the recycle center is, and it was envisioned to be a fairly small facility. At the same time also, when we signed that MOU, there were a significant number of limitations. and guardrails that were put up with regard to fundraising, with regard to size, with regard to compliance. And essentially what happened is the community was very loud and clear that at least certain segments didn't want to see that what became a much larger facility show up in Mercerville. The other thing that also came to pass was that there were a number of wetlands, et cetera. So it was a confluence of events, and Micah also realized they would struggle to fundraise there. So with that being said, I do agree insofar as that there were some challenges with the site, yet they were not just simply coming from the public, there were also logistics issues. What I would also focus on, too, is the fact that I believe that arts do belong in the parks. I believe the sculpture garden is a great example of art in our parks, and I don't think that music and performing arts should be separate and distinct.
When you consider that we've doubled down on multifamily housing in downtown, and the only park available is Mercerdale Park, it's symbolic of the disconnect that's been going on in this community on these kinds of things. We look at an issue like putting Micah, an institution I think everybody in this room raise their hand and say out loud, in a park that is the only place where all these multifamily people are going to be able to take their kids or dogs or what have you and play. And this kind of disconnect has been symbolic of what's going on in the city. We talk about let's have businesses and we're going to get some tax revenue, and yet we zone downtown so that businesses can't exist there. So when Island Books and Odd Chocolate and Mercy Vet and Convivial all depart, what's that do to sustainability? We're going to get in our cars and drive off the island to go get those services. And that's the disconnect that's going on here. And if I'm on the city council, I'm going to address it.
Hi there, thank you both for stepping up to run and for the work you've done. My name is Liz Friedman. I've been a resident for about 15 years. I have kids in the school system, kids on local sports teams, dogs in the park. You might say I'm a Mercer Island power user. My question to you is about the budget. And we often hear candidates talk about the budget in aggregate, that we need budget efficiency, we have a budget deficit, we need to cut, we need to spend. I'd love to know your thoughts about where we should be investing more and where we should be cutting more.
One of the things we should be investing in is to analyze how we spend our money. We've not had an audit of city operations since 2005, and there seems to be considerable reluctance to undertake that. What do we have to lose? That will give us data in order to be able to better govern ourselves. We don't keep track of what our employees and our equipment do in any kind of a detailed way. Some people turn in pieces of paper that aren't kept or aren't really usable. In my company, for example, we use electronic systems to keep track of what people do, and that way we can see where the money's going. And we can ensure that we're spending our money in accordance with the priorities set by the City Council, which is one of their primary jobs to do. So that's one area of investment that's good. I think there's some things, for example, the wayfaring signs, $50,000. Who needs to know how to get to the town center or to City Hall? The Mercer Island Beautification Park. No plan, no budget, no nothing. It's nice, it's going to be nice, but we're spending money without any idea of why we're spending it. And these are the kinds of controls we need to put in place to be sure that we're not doing that. Thank you.
I think it's a great question. I'd like us to invest where we need certainty, and where we need certainty is in our public safety, and that includes preventative services for our kids. So police, fire, and YFS, I think that's an area for definite investment. I think where we need to reduce is the areas where there's a lot of individual benefit that comes from those services. So one of the things that we're actually looking at is parking. Should we be putting in some more defined parking areas in our town center so that there's a greater turnover where people can get to light rail for their 4-hour trip into downtown. I think we should be investing in technology that can serve as the backbone for some of the efficiencies. You know, a lot of people have been talking about our utility infrastructure, and yet we don't have a SCADA system right now. And that is one of the things the utility board and the utility department is looking at. Because until that, it's very difficult to actually catalog a lot of the work, that needs to be done in the maintenance work. So there are some areas that do need to be invested in, and some areas where we may potentially have to reduce. I would call out that those wayfaring signs, there seems to be an interesting misunderstanding that the city actually paid for those. Those came from a grant, and that was, I think, a wise move on the part of our staff to go after that grant. They paid for those, and believe it or not, people who don't live on Mercer Island actually come onto Mercer Island, want to be able to find their way around, and I suspect as we have light rail, et cetera, those wayfaring signs will be even more appreciated. So great question, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Bob Harper. I've been on the island for 25 years. You know, we hear so much about the structural imbalance. In other words, property taxes can only go up 1%, and that doesn't meet the rate of inflation. But if you look at your own website, you'll see that over the past 6.5 years, the increase in property taxes on average has been 3.03%, not 1%. The inflation, which you use to measure for your negotiating agreements and these kinds of things, or the CPIW Seattle Bellevue, has been 2.5% year over year. And that's statistics from the Department of Labor. But yet the general fund spending, which is what everybody seems to be concerned about, is 3.22% year over year. So that's a 55% rate increase over the rate of inflation. So I'm not sure we have a structural imbalance, but if you think we still have a structural imbalance, explain why.
Great questions, lots of numbers in there. First of all, the property taxes that are collected from the city represent roughly 12% of your total property tax bill. So if you paid $100 of property taxes, $12 comes to the city. The 1% that the city council can raise is the equivalent of 1% of $12 or 12 cents. So that's essentially the city's portion of the taxes. What I understand actually is that what we were able to collect is just under 2%, those numbers coming from our former finance director. The other part that I would call out here, and I think this is where we'd have to sit down with some spreadsheets, is that the rate of inflation might be 3.3 or 3-some-odd%, but the majority of our city's costs are people costs, and those are going up more than 3%. Anybody who's managing a team and managing healthcare benefits, et cetera, knows that historically those rates have been going up 5-8% per year, which again has pushed the city's expenses further. When you look at the general fund and you say it's grown 3%, let's keep in mind that there's also been carryovers every year in order to try to string along some of the services that we've been wanting to provide. When we were putting together the 1920 biennium, there was actually about $2 million in carryovers, in addition to an additional almost 3 in cuts that were continued. So I do believe, yes, there's some efficiencies, but I don't think it's going to be sufficient. I think the fact that Medina is out there with a property tax initiative similar to Mercer Island, and Newcastle's reputed to be doing the same next year, speaks that we might be the canary in the coal mine.
If you look at your property tax, you'll see even in the first 6 months of this year, it's up 3.1% over last year. So, just a clarification, the CPIW is actually the inflation number that you use for wages. The W is for wages, and that's what it's focused on.
When Prop 1 came up, we were told that we had a $5 million structural deficit and/or we have a $500,000 deficit in the biennium, 1920 biennium. Well, the surplus was $1,432,129, and that's net of transfers to the contingency fund. The plain fact is that we don't manage our money very well. And the idea that we just need more money to spend on things like wayfaring signs. And by the way, the city itself said they spent $25,000 worth of labor on the signs over and above the grant. So the idea that, okay, we've got a grant, we can just spend the money, doesn't speak very highly of the management of our finances that we have. We are currently saving a fair amount of money in salaries because of all the people who've resigned. And while that's going to be a one-time savings, we need to look at how we hire people, what we do with the people we have, and how we make that as efficient as possible, because the consequence otherwise is that we're going to have to cut services. And that's not something I want to see happen on this island. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sidley Smith, and I am back with the same question I posed to the previous candidates about how, in these times of budget uncertainty, you would prioritize or maintain or renovate shared facilities like the Mary Wade Pool or track and field. This question came up a number of years ago. There was a proposal to redo the track and the sports field next to IMS, which are not in very good shape. And then it's been radio silence, and Island Crest Park was refurbished. Those fields were refurbished and look great. But I didn't, as a citizen, have an understanding about where the money went and how those priorities are established. So I would be interested in hearing from both of you on that. Thank you.
I was around when the prior repair to that track was made, and I used to trip over the roots from the poplar trees as well. I think that there are opportunities for the school board and for the city council to address ways of dealing with joint use facilities, of which we have a lot, Mary Wade being one of them, IMS Fields being another one, Island Park being another one, and that we can achieve efficiencies in that area, and we can be smarter about what we do. I also believe that we do a lot of our public works improvements, such as the Island Park field and everything else, is a function of people beating the drum for it, the baseball people, and so I don't know in our way of government if we can ever outlaw advocacy setting priorities. That's not an ideal kind of thing, but I think that happens. And I think we have to, as a city council, sit down and say, what are the most important things, and how do we make sure that the facilities we have are adequately maintained or improved, as the case may be, or shut down and replaced. Thank you.
So the city and the district have a long and rich history of partnership. There's a whole series of interlocal agreements, or what we call ILAs, that actually try to optimize the relationship between the two. So for example, the city has been historically maintaining the fields on behalf of the district so that they don't have to have the same maintenance or duplicate equipment, et cetera. Those ILAs are being looked at right now. Mary Wade Pool, we provide about $140,000 in funding every year to keep that barely alive. The school district is actually the one who's responsible for the capital that goes into that, including a bunch of the school facilities. When it comes to like some of the sports fields, the turf, et cetera, the Parks Department right now is actually going through the process of assessing whether or not they're capturing the actual cost to manage and replace them. Because we pass on user fees. So when somebody rents out one of those turf fields or any field, there's actually a charge associated with the idea that once the lifespan of that field, the turf in particular, has passed, that there's enough money in the bank to go ahead and refund it. So they're going through that whole part. The other thing that I think is an important issue that we're going to have to make sure we address is that when we go and consider some of these assessments and the facilities that we're managing and maintaining, are we in accordance with Title IX? We do need to make sure that as we look at the facilities at Island Crest Park that supports the high school baseball team, is when we look at the facilities that are at the South Mercer playfields, which support, for example, the women's softball team, that there is equity there. So we've got some work to do, but there's a great partnership underway.
Hello, my name is Tom Acker, and I was actually going to give you both a softball question, but the gentleman up in front of me piqued my interest. I was originally going to ask you why each of you want to run, and by the way, thank you both for your service. It isn't fun, and Mayor Bertlin, you've done 2 terms, and Jake, you've had some great experiences on the island, and it isn't easy, so thank you both. Actually, it was this gentleman over here. He asked the question about being engaged with voters. And Mayor Bertlin, I'd like you to speak to your historical perspective, and Jake, I'd like to know what you do in the future. And specifically, there have been major issues over the last 8 or so years that have taken a lot of energy from the citizens to kind of course correct the city council, whether it's being for tolling before you were against it, or Kite Hill paving that before you were against it at Luton Burbank, or the bus station, all of those kind of activities. So I'd like to know from both your perspectives, one, how are you going to engage with the citizenry and stay focused on the needs of the community? And 2, how are you going to really demonstrate and use your critical thinking to stick to the contracts that have already been in place, whether it's the putting the ball fields in the old East Seattle School District, which were supposed to be there and never followed up on, or the bus station, which we said no to about 4 years, and now the door's been opened and it's coming back. How are you both going to advocate for the community and listen to voters? Because the #1 commodity for all of us on the island is time. We don't have a lot of it, so we want to trust that our representatives are advocating for us. Thank you both.
So I'm losing track at this point. Right. I think there's some great questions, and engagement has been a consistent theme. And I think that the city, still has a lot of catching up to do with where people are in terms of the use of social media and multiple forms of outreach. In talking to the kids at Island Books last night, there was a lot of conversation about coming to the school and coming to their classrooms and coming to their clubs. And I think that there's some valid themes that are in there, and I think about that a lot. We've also made some strides with Let's Talk. We'll have a new website that's up in December, and it's miserable. The current website is miserable, and I'm going to be the first one to speak to that. I think that there's a balance here, and that is, do you want to have a city council that puts things out to you to get input, recognizing that it may be changed, it may be thrown out, or it may be wholly embraced? One of the challenges that you have is getting input at the right time and the right moment. There were conversations about parking at Kite Hill. They were put out there as ideas, they were not put out there as fait accomplis, and they were withdrawn when it was clear that that isn't what the public wanted to have happen. An example of where there's misinformation, I think this issue about the East Seattle ball fields came up. The city has nothing to do with that. That was a transaction that was between Boys and Girls Club of King County and Boys and Girls Club of Mercer Island. So the city has not been a part of administrating. In fact, when I talked to the previous city manager, no one had ever even seen a copy of the contract there. So I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think that this is where we're going to have to use some more tools and some more creative engagement to move forward.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for your service with the City Council. I start my day walking my dogs down Homestead Field, and so when I started this campaign, I get all kinds of advice. If I'm elected to the City Council, I'm going to hold office hours, and I'm going to hold them monthly in some public place for as long as anybody wants to come and talk to me, because I'm just an old-fashioned guy, and I like to talk to people face-to-face, and I love all the more modern kinds of things and social media and all that stuff, but I'm willing to listen. And over a business career and a lifetime, I've developed the ability to listen to people, to treat them with mutual respect, and to not only listen to what they say, but hear what they say. And those are 2 different things, or at least they are in my experience. I'm handicapped, which is take your pick. But that's one thing. The second thing is to study the issues and to work hard at being a city councilman and to seek information from people and to be receptive to it and not to think that you have a better idea or I know better than you. I may have a different opinion, but that doesn't mean that I don't respect your opinion or respect you or want to listen to what you have to say. Thank you.
And
An issue that's critical to islanders is Seattle access and east side access. And it's widely known that the train isn't going to solve the I-90 congestion. In fact, it's very likely going to induce more demand, especially on Mercer Island, especially if we have the 1 mile zoning lane issue. There's no way you can go to Costco on the train. There's no way you can make a 5 a.m. release at Everett on the train. So my questions to you is, what's your view of improving our access to I-90, especially for safety services that we're going to need from off-island? And two particular aspects. One is our I-90 Island Crestway access to SOV, HOV. And the second one is the east side access that's now becoming impossible all the way from the top of the hill toward Costco, all the way onto Mercer Island, where there probably are geometric solutions that we can solve for better access to the island. So what are your views on improving I-90 access? Because the train is never going to solve this problem until the sun burns out. Thank you.
Hold on, you forgot to tell us your name.
Tom, been on the island 40 years.
Thank you, Tom. Well, mobility is a terrific problem. If you wave signs on East Mercer in the morning, you have more guts than I do. That's a problem that needs to be solved, and we need to put our attention to that. That's number one. Number two, we need to work to retain the Island Crest HOV access to the freeway westbound. We have to make sure that North Mercer Way is not plugged completely, because if we have the bus dump that Sound Transit would have us have, that is going to cease being an east-west arterial. And anybody who lives north of the freeway or out on First Hill is going to have to go through downtown. Well, the capacity for downtown traffic is already, or the traffic is beyond whatever the capacity is, and that mobility issue has to be addressed. Whether we have the talent on our staff to be able to do that is an open question. But these are issues that are critical, Mercer Island, critical to our future. Thank you.
So a quick history piece here. We lost access at Island Crestway westbound into those HOV lanes due to the Federal Highway Administration. And that was in part, it got wrapped up in a lot of the Sound Transit work, et cetera. And again, I'm happy to have that conversation. So there's always been this opportunity to go back to DC and try to lobby the federal government. But at the same time, we also have recognized we have a state government that is busy suing the Trump administration. And Elaine Chao is head of federal highways. So there's probably not a great combination of politics there. So I think that there is still, I'm not going to say a lot of hope, but there's still some work that can be done there. But I think more importantly, what we have to do is we're going to have to continue to work, and we are working with WashDOT, who actually controls the intersection that goes eastbound from East Mercer Way. It's compounded by the fact that we have traffic issues with the JCC, with the French American School right there as well. So obviously that's part of that whole community facility zone conversation. So that's an ongoing point that has to be addressed. The other part that I would say is, yes, we do need to keep our streets in our town center moving, North Mercer Way and West Mercer Way. On North Mercer Way, again, this comes down to a lot of the work that we're going to have to do with Sound Transit and Metro to make sure that those buses in a roundabout, should it eventually go in as planned, enables our cars to turn left at the big intersection and to get on there at 76. So these are all activity, this is business in motion right now, or not in motion.
Thanks, Debbie.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
My name's Al Lippert. I've lived on the island for 25 years. I know we've got a serious parking problem from Mercerdale all the way through Town Center, etc. So just out of curiosity, at 8:30 on multiple weekday mornings, I walked around Town Center and I looked for parking stickers on the cars parked there. Less than half had parking stickers at 8:30 in the morning, and you need one until 9. My question to both of you, will you commit to serious enforcement of parking irregularities on Mercer Island? Thank you.
Parking enforcement definitely needs some new attention in the coming months, and I think particularly as there's more and more demand for transit, there's going to be more and more demand for parking close to the light rail and the bus station. So yes, I think we can have that conversation, but let's also keep in mind when our police are busy looking whether or not there's a parking sticker at 8:30, they may or may not be parked by the schools as the kids are going to their elementary schools. They may or may not be checking speed limits on Island Crestway. They may or may not be responding to some accident that happened somewhere or burglary. So we have to recognize there's limited resources. Now that said, I've been advocating for quite some time that there's some more parking assessment study that goes on in our town center, because I believe that we do need to be able to make sure that Islanders can go down there and park for